Oh, ijanki shina hini karigiwi. Oji shani hi chakora hare, wore hi karashire da ge wanje. Jeskege hamte ge jagu hi hekshina na hanana kuida, iskege wange namwi wahaje. Mashus ka hi gaide, HoChunk Kija, wanhud, hajega jena. Jeskege jagu hi hekshina na hanana ku, wange namshina. Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? Did you guys get that? So, my apologies if your HoChunk is a little rusty, but I'm really proud to be able to introduce myself in our native language. As a matter of fact, thousands of years ago, that would have been the only language that was spoken in this land where you're at. And those of you who have familiarity and history with this part of this region of Wisconsin, this driftless area, know that the HoChunk people hold a lot of history. Some of your farms may have some evidence of that history. So I always make sure I never try to prove our existence through archaeology, but let folks know that we're here today, and we're very fortunate not only to be here, but also to have this language to which our tribe is named from. That's where it comes from. HoChunk, the people of the big voice, or people of the sacred voice. So today I was really inspired by each of you, a battery of questions that come through, showing the level of intelligence and how close to this particular issue you are. And I think a lot has to do with our changing times. I began really noticing what was happening during the spearfishing controversies. How many remember those? Remember that? Yeah, that was something else. And if you are a young Native American boy or girl going through high school about that time, there are things that you're never going to forget. And those are things that carry with you for a long time. So I want to begin by saying there's a couple things I've noticed when I began some of the advocacy in environmental issues. Not long after we had, before the turn of the century, fighting Exxon and Billiton in Crandon, Wisconsin. And for those of you who remember that, the advocacy of the brilliant folks back then were limited with the information we had available. Remember that. We went to libraries to get our information. We looked at microfiche. We interviewed people. We didn't have the internet. We couldn't pull up a map and show people things. And so, which showed me today by the line of questioning that you're doing your homework and you're using resources. You could probably pick up a lot right on your phone during this if you had actual reception in this area. So, you're still struggling in some areas. My first observation is it kind of sucks fighting for your land, doesn't it? During Crandon, when I first went there and met Fred Ackley and Zoltan Grossman, Debbie McNutt, and a number of Herb Bittner, and a lot of folks, and I was naively watching as things went on, and I was watching what some of the environmental advocacy groups were doing, and I was watching what my Native brothers and sisters were doing, and they were kind of different things. Matter of fact, I saw some other folks that were there that I didn't expect to see. I saw people that were on the docks just a few years ago fighting tribes, saying that they were taking your walleye away. And all of a sudden you saw these Wisconsin sportsmen who felt that their pristine water sources were in jeopardy and in danger. And all of a sudden these people that were just across wearing flannel, smelling like beer, were sitting next to you, smudging with sage and hoping that they could protect what little bit that they've worked for. And so as we moved along, I noticed that we were up against Goliath. We were up against this unending, unlimited entity that had resources in other businesses, in our politicians, and they just had this ability to create media and press, and they're the ones that had the ability to kick out 2,000 signs in 2 seconds and reshape the narrative of what they were attempting to do. And I have to be honest that as we sat there with our drums and our sage and our tobacco and our prayers, it didn't seem like a lot against what we were really facing. And so, but we relied on each other because that's all we had. And we began with education. We began the development or the real enriching portion of this, the Wolf Watershed Education Project, where students led this, and some of the advocacy workers led a campaign to sit down and educate people what those impacts were at the headwaters and how that trickled down and how indiscriminate pollution and the evisceration of what this industry did was going to affect our communities and our households. And so it turned how people thought about the mining industry, who were always quick to say, you're going to use power. You drove an SUV here, and really trying to shape that type of really ugh and grunt, lowbrow understanding of what resource use is. And so later on, as I come to grow into this more, I started getting mad. I started getting mad because I don't like losing. I started to do a little bit more research, because telling them that the land is sacred or telling them that you're polluting the waters or that you're making people sick isn't enough. It doesn't move legislation. It doesn't. Your politicians, as good as friends as they are to you, they're not going to turn around and go and write up bills that stop this development. And so what does is people. What does is public opinion. I want to believe as a political scientist that the essence of democracy is still here somewhere. If you walk away and say it's gone, it's going to be gone. I would like to think that even though they shut you down in 3 minutes at a public hearing, you still got a chance to give your best effort. And so I won't let that go, that our voices have meaning and have impact and have resulted in change. And so when they're collective voices and when the frequency is high, you can expect that to result in something that you've been looking for. And you also, while you're doing this, are setting examples for those little ones that you're coming home to. That, nobody's here today because they want to be here. We all have things we'd like to be doing. It's Friday night, for crying out loud. This is the last place I want to be, but we have a responsibility to make sure that the things that we've enjoyed throughout our lives are something our kids and grandkids could enjoy. And so if this Friday night helps to do that, we've all done really well. I work for the HoChunk Nation. Has anybody heard of the HoChunk Nation before? Okay. Just a poll. I'm gonna do some little polls here. How many people think of casinos when you hear HoChunk? Be honest, because we pay people a lot of money to make you think that. So just a brief flyover, and something I've noticed when I've done some discussions is that people they know who HoChunk is, but they don't really know. The HoChunk Nation employs approximately 3,400 employees. So, boy, that's a lot of casino workers if that's what you think of the HoChunk Nation. In actuality, only about 2/3 of those work in the gaming area. So of those overall, statistically, about 70% of that 3,400 workforce is non-tribal. 85% of the people that you see in a casino are non-tribal. To be a president, to be a servant of the people means you have to serve everybody. Our communities are not homogenous. They have HoChunks, non-HoChunks. It would be absurd to think that the Black community segregates themselves and the Latino community does that and the American Indian does and the Hmong people do and the non-natives. That's not how we live. And so, and that's not how environmental destruction sees us. We are, they target marginalized areas. They target areas that probably don't have the resources to defend themselves. And so the solidarity that we have is really what has allowed us to triumph. And let me give you a couple examples. Crandon Mine left Wisconsin. It doesn't exist. They were empowered by their work they did just at the turn of the century with Perrier, who wanted to go out. Remember those? Remember that area? We've had a number of different successes, and don't get me wrong, we've had a lot of battles that we walked away from in defeat because there are things that are changing in our own democratic process that disallow us to get our voices heard. The permitting process, a lot of times when somebody even sought to mine in Wisconsin, every one of you would have known about it. Every one of you would have been sitting in a town hall just like this, discussing the concept of whether or not this company was going to do your community well or not. That doesn't exist anymore. Public hearings are somewhere in the 7th or 8th portion of an application process. And notification is somewhere in that 50 sheets of BS you have to go through with your junk mail, and all of a sudden you find you're going to have a cell tower, you're going to have a power line or a dry dam, and then when you try to make your case, they'll say, well, February 8th, you were told, you could have been there, you could have said something, and all of a sudden we've lost before we even ran. This isn't simply about power lines, but I know that when you're really in tune with something, you are acute to these little things that you hear that might help or might mean something. Earlier this afternoon, you heard the transmission line went around this Indian country and came back down. Do you guys remember hearing that? Went around the LCO area? Yeah. Nobody asked how that happened, did they? It just went around. They didn't go there, just did that. I don't know how it did that, but I sure wish it'd do that where I live, right? So this is really going to make some delineations between what it means to be an advocacy group and what it means to be a sovereign nation. I heard a little something today that, I don't want to see these power lines here. I don't want to see them 170 feet up in here. Why don't they put them in the ground? Remember that? Yeah. Well, that's my area. You guys know what's in the ground? Those are my family. So you keep them out of the air, I'll keep them out of the ground. And, tribes have, and by the way, I'm not trying to rally or get everybody all motivated and hopped up on goofballs and find out I didn't really say anything. But tribes have some unique authorities, and sometimes this muscle that we have called sovereignty and federal recognition, we don't work enough. We don't challenge, and sometimes we've gotten into the position of asking permission before we just go ahead and do things that we already inherently have. When you ask permission, you're basically succumbing and saying you are subservient to that, and we don't work like that. That's not the HoChunk Nation. These are our battlegrounds. We defended them. We're here today because of that. And I'm proud of, a lot of our history where we have really done our best work at the table and not on the battlefield. And we've sat across from people and checked our bags and understood that this is what they're going after, and here's how we can work with each other. Sometimes there's no common ground. And this is where, when we look at why did BHP move? Why did Perrier move? Why did GTAC pack their bags and get out? What was going on? Because you know what? They had the money, they had the PR, they had the microphone, they had the politicians, they had some interest groups, they had a lot of vehicles behind them. And yet they still said, Wisconsin's not going to be home for our initiative. And why was that? What corporations do is they don't really care what's being said in this room here, although there may be a plant in here somewhere. You know, look around. Could be the butler, I don't know. But what corporations do is they're able to monetize or quantify what this effort is to what their product is. And so in Wisconsin, in HoChunk country up to Black River Falls where the line meets, but also has become basically Swiss cheese due to the frac sand mining industry. And you know, you want to talk about aesthetics or cultural landscapes that have been eviscerated. I've never seen an industry so adamant about extracting resources and then not using them. You know, we've got sand piles that will cover a small city because the product price is just not there to either sell or to ship or transport. And so yet we still have corporations and 40-ton trucks cruising down, you know, roads that weren't designed to last that long. And all of a sudden, you know, you have these other deleterious effects. As the president of the HoChunk Nation, the things that come to you aren't the good things. Yes, you cut the ribbon, and yes, you bring the shovel out, and you know, yes, you get to meet all kinds of cool people. But the people that you work for aren't showing up in your office because they're happy about something. There's something that's pretty bad. And you know, when you work for the HoChunk Nation, I always said, you know, since 1963, as we formed as a sovereign nation, only 2 presidents have made it a full term without being removed. Because we can do that. We are that close. So you got to bust your ass to get a C- in that place. And in order to do that, you have to be very responsive, which means you can't head nod for too long. You've got to lead with action, then words. And so the toughest part is when an 84-year-old tribal elder who really is living 20 years beyond their projected lifespan comes to you and says, I don't know what's wrong with my water. I don't know what's wrong with it tastes funny, and I don't know what to do. Could you come look at it? And yes, we can. But we can't test what's wrong, why your water changed, because the company gets to protect the chemicals that they put in. They don't have to tell you. We could test for 170 different things, but the company is protected from releasing that information. I want to help you, but I can't. And that's the worst thing you could do if you work for people, if you work for their best interest, when you put your family aside and you don't have an answer for that. And so some of the things related to the power line I want to close out with is, you know, as I'd mentioned, this is home for me. I pay my mortgage a couple hours away from here, but this is always home to me. And this land is important, and it has a lot of history. Not just rich indigenous archaeological history, but also history with us as homesteaders, as farmsteaders. You know, places where we seen our firsts, had our firsts. And what we have in front of us is a vehicle that threatens that history, that changes things, with antiquated technology, by the way. While one portion of the state and people are moving in a good way, there's still people living off this subsidized energy structure that we're not able to hold on to anymore. And we're there at that point. This area, when we talk about why transmission lines don't go through certain areas, or why pipelines, or why mining doesn't happen, when you're on Indian land, when you're on trust land, and your attorney, I'm not going to doubt his experience and credibility, but when we get into actual trust issues, applying eminent domain to trust properties or even potential trust properties, how does that work? How does that affect a corporation's ability to secure land in what they call the public interest or the best public interest when it comes to Indian land? I tell you how it works. It costs a lot of money to probably not get the answer you're looking for. And so a lot of what happens in Indian country isn't a matter of congressional law or statute. It's a matter sometimes by dicta, which means you're going to run through the adjudicatory process all the way to, and we don't have to worry about state court in a lot of times. We write our own laws, we flex our own muscles, and we have what's called deference or full faith and credit to the tribal court system. We also have the ability, as Secaucus and Chippewas did after Crandon Mine, to develop our own treatment as state standards, so that we can pass standards like 2.5 PM 2.5 or different water levels, air quality standards that other agencies, companies, corporations, municipals must follow if it goes even beyond our borders. And we do. When a corporation looks at the potential litigation on a longitudinal scale, they have to apply that to what the actual product is that they're going to complete. And if that product is going to not only cost you X millions or billions of dollars to get to, but also take, as we would, take the 90-day filing limit all the way to the end, or this next step, or this referral to this step, corporations look at that longitudinal map and realize that it's just not cost effective to go forward with that. We're not going to win in the polls or in the legislature or in media because we can't afford the millions of dollars for commercials and things like that. We'll win by the support, the grassroots, the alliances that we form, the unusual and unexpected alliances that are formed. But also, we win in the idea that, if the market, if we take into their argument that the market determines it, the market's going to determine that it's going to cost you more to get less. And that's the one thing I like about working as a nation as opposed to interest group, is not that we don't have limited resources, but we have unlimited endurance. And we can raise a question as to how land even came into your possession to even have the right to put a pole there. Because in the most cases, when land was, as one of my HoChunk fathers would say, you can't steal land. That land is still there. It's still there. Nobody picked it up and moved it anywhere. You're playing a paper game. You're running around looking for records. You know what happened was a long time ago, new farmsteaders, homesteaders got to make agreements with local tribes in residence, and they actually had those honored. And once they were moved off, the Army and the federal government would keep them off the land. Eventually, the farmers never even negotiated with the tribes and had a trustee sign off on that. So most of the land was signed over without them knowing the federal government would move them out. When they came back and had no place, like the HoChunk did 11 times, they didn't have anywhere to go. So the federal government left pieces of land for them called homesteads, but not in trust, but gave them to them and said, you can live on this 40 acres and you can try to build your life here. That wasn't enough to survive, to hunt, to fish, to farm, to gather. And so the tribes ended up selling some of that property. So in the worst case scenario, even if they didn't sell it, the counties who were developing in the early or later 1800s actually started imposing that as what they call, you might know this time of year, a taxable moment. So when the federal government transferred title to that land, the tribes were subject to taxation. The land would actually go into default and then eventually foreclosure, and the counties would actually own that. If that agreement was never validated at the origin, then the land that the counties actually seized early was taken illegally. Now, if you have to do research from that, there is nothing on the internet. This is library stuff that's going to take a long time to evaluate and determine the credibility of that land. Part of these ancillary cases involve original land acquisition, and it's mind-boggling to folks. And so we're a little bit more sophisticated now. We're not saying you took our land. We're not saying you're damaging. We're not saying you're racist. We're saying we're smarter and we'll use our potential. And we won't stop. And so I'm very proud at the tenacity of organizations like the collective group here, of the alliances that are made between people that maybe we haven't shared the same views with, but also the partnerships that have been forged between tribes and people that have really considered the impacts of what our state has been allowing and what we can do together to make sure that those are a better living condition for our young one. Thank you, everyone.